There it goes. All right. Hello once again, Internet. My name is Nicole, and this is my husband, Ivan. And today we are going to be talking about Medical Apartheid by Harriet A. Washington, which is a nonfiction book about medical experimentation on Black people, primarily in the United States, but a little bit elsewhere in the world as well. And before that, we'll probably talk a little bit about what else we've been reading and whatnot. Do you want to go first with that, Ivan?
This is pretty much the only thing I've managed to read in the past couple weeks.
Me too.
I have still a bunch of books on my queue now, the book we're doing for next week, as well as the fifth book in the Johannes Cabal series. You read it, right? You read The Necromancer.
I read the first one.
You read the first one. Well, this is the fifth one. I was really looking forward to it, but this one was kind of long, so I never got around to it.
What I was gonna ask you a thing. But what's the book for next time? I forgot. That's what I was gonna ask.
Let me look it up real quick. It's the first Ananokan book.
It's the first what book?
The Quest of Undoing Tales from the Land of Ananokan, Volume 1, by John P. Lodgson.
Right, it was a humor fantasy book. Right,
yes.
I remember that now. Yes, and that will be, so I think that's just gonna have to be like December 4th, so in 3 weeks. Because in 2 weeks is the weekend after Thanksgiving, and I'm gonna be flying that day, so that's
right. Yeah,
that's not gonna work.
Okay.
So we're gonna do that December 4th.
Between my drive over to you and our drive back and all the other time, I will have probably finished everything on my queue at that point.
Yep, probably.
Including the book that you pick right now, which is what?
Well, so I wanted to talk to you about that. So December 5th is probably like either that weekend. So my students are taking their exam December 5th, which is a Monday.
Okay.
So I'm going to be moving up by you in December. Do you want to keep doing this even if we are physically in the same city? That's the real question. Like, do we have fun? Do we want to keep doing this? And then we'll just, we can just have a live show, and either we'll just be in the same room, or we can go to different rooms.
Yeah, and go to different rooms and talk to each other.
Yep.
It's fine, I think. I mean, I have fun doing this. Do people like this?
I like it. People seem to like it, but I mean, there are longer videos, so longer videos tend to have fewer views than short videos.
I don't actually participate in the YouTube part of this channel. I don't see the YouTube chat.
Yeah.
Anything like that. So.
I would say so. It's dependent a lot on the book we're reading. But they get between like 100 and like 400 views in like a week, which for my channel is pretty normal.
Okay.
Because I'm not like a huge YouTuber. So I think if we want to keep doing it, that's totally reasonable.
Okay. Yeah, let's keep doing it. I think it's fun.
Then we shall keep doing it, and I don't know what book I'm gonna pick because I wasn't sure.
Maybe we can attract people. That's fine. I mean, we have so much time between the next one that we can.
Yeah, we have 3 weeks between the next one, and
do you have any ideas?
I feel like there was a book I was debating with. Central Station. That's the book. That's the other book I was thinking about picking last time.
Is that China Mieville?
No, that is Levy to Hear, and it's the one that's like a cyberpunk book where humans have started going out to colonize the world, and it's like set in the city that's kind of developed around like the space elevator, and there's like cyberpunk elements and probably mystery and some stuff. I'm mostly interested in it for the setting. Like, the setting sounds cool.
Okay.
Are you okay? So we're gonna go with that one?
I'm okay with that one. Yeah, I mean, I've thought about reading it myself. I've kind of passed up on it, but if you want to do it, then let's do it.
Okay, let's do that one. We'll do Central Station by Levy to Hear, and that one will be, I have a sneaking suspicion it's going to end up being in January, because December is going to be kind of a weird month for us.
Okay.
With the moving and the things. So, but we'll let you guys know on December 4th when we talk about Ivan's pick, when the next one will be. So yeah, so okay, so in the past 3 weeks, because this one got a little delayed, I haven't really read anything else. I've read a comic, and that was it. I read Monstrous Volume 1, and that was it. I was in this, so in the past couple of weeks, and the reason why this was delayed is that I was writing my thesis. So I wasn't really doing a lot of things that weren't writing my thesis. that was basically what I was doing. So yeah. But Monstrous was really good. I don't know if Ivan would like it, because Ivan doesn't read a ton of comics, and also I just don't know if he would like it that much. But I thought it was really good, and it was really cool. It's about...
I read some comics.
Yeah, but like, of the comics that are in the house, what % have you read?
5% maybe.
Yeah.
And that's mostly like all of Fables and
All
the
of
first
Lucifer?
3. Well, I haven't read all of Lucifer. I've only read the first 3 volumes. There's a comic book shop near me, and maybe they have 4 and 5.
Okay.
Yeah. No, I aim to read that eventually, but I also aim to finish Fables. I think it might have been finished by this
Yeah,
point.
I think the last one came out like a year ago. So yes. Yes,
Yeah.
I think there's one you haven't read.
But Fables has gotten a little convoluted, so I'm not.
I mean, it's a little convoluted in the beginning. Like, there's a lot of characters in Fables.
Yeah, it gets more. It gets convoluted by Fables standards too, and there's like a lot of random spin-offs, lots of stuff. There's a point where I think it probably should have ended. I still like it, but I think there's a point where it should have ended, and that was like 10 volumes ago.
That happens sometimes with comic series that don't have like a defined end date, and
Yeah.
get really big, and then they just keep going.
It's like Supernatural. They had a really good ending, and then they were so popular that they kept going. And while I don't think it started to suck, because I still enjoy the show, I haven't like seen it. I haven't watched it in like 3 years, but still enjoy the show more or less. It's not the same.
Yep.
So yeah.
Anyway, moving on. Do you want to talk about the book?
Yeah.
Okay.
Let's talk about the book.
So I'm just gonna go ahead and say, like, we're just gonna talk about the whole thing because this is nonfiction. I guess,
it's not spoilers. It's stuff that has happened over the last 100 years.
Yeah, it's nonfiction and it's historical. So, like, technically, you probably don't know. Like, part of the author's impetus for writing this book is that you probably don't know about a lot of the things that are in the book, but like you could find out. And like some people, if you have any interest in this book, you've probably at least heard of like the Tuskegee syphilis study, which the author talks about a little bit. And like, so yes, we're just going to talk about the whole book. If you plan on reading it, you'll probably still like. I don't really think spoilers are a thing for nonfiction, so we're just going to talk about the whole book.
Yep.
So anyway, so the book is basically structured where the author goes from the past to the present, and she talks about a number of different cases where Black people have been used for like abusive medical research. And yes, that's the premise of the book. Part of the reason why this book took me a really long time to read was because in like the first like 3 chapters. Okay, so there's some really gross stuff in this book. Heads up if you're planning on reading it. I'm about to say something kind of gross. The author talks about one of the, I forget his name, but the guy who's like the father of gynecology and how he developed how he developed a technique for repairing vaginal fistulas on unanesthetized slave women. And I almost noped out of this book at that point. I was just like, no, that's not okay. I am not okay with this. Like,
Yep.
So uncomfortable and just like bad. Like, I don't know. For me, that was probably the worst thing to read about in the entire book, but you might feel differently about it. And I would assume you knew who that human was before.
James Six. I wasn't actually all that familiar with him. He's not. We don't have like a strong historic focus at UCLA, so most of like the old-timey physicians that I've learned about independently of medical school. So yeah, so I'm a doctor, by the way.
Oh yes,
In
yes.
case you didn't know.
In case you haven't watched this before, Ivan is an MD, PhD, and I am about to, as I just mentioned, file my thesis for my PhD in microbiology.
So we're both scientists. I'm also kind of a physician. I don't really see patients, but you know, I did med school and I quit afterwards to pursue a career of science because that's what I like to do. So yeah, some of these things I've heard about, but a surprising number I haven't actually, which is sort of worrying in a sense that like the ethics courses and general courses in medical school don't really touch on a lot of these very important issues and issues that have a lot of relevance to the way we practice medicine and conduct medical research today. And that's a shame because there's a lot to be learned from our history and not, you know, firstly in broad strokes of how we should conduct ourselves as doctors and how we should conduct research on people, and as well as the race and class issues that plague our incredibly broken healthcare system and their historical roots and how they're basically unchanged today from the way they were 100 or even 200 years ago in certain respects. So this book hit pretty close to home in certain cases because even though in a lot of the cases I wasn't aware of the historical context of some of these issues, this is what I saw, you know, day to day in med school. Trying to take a medical history from a Spanish-speaking only person, using the like 2 or 3 Spanish words I know while like a translator is unavailable, and somehow trying to consent them for surgery while having completely no ability to explain why they need the surgery or would it be good for them is not is not a one-time experience for me.
which is really unfortunate.
Yep.
I think we can all agree that's really unfortunate.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess from my perspective, so we do take ethics classes that are mandated, and they include human research.
So we just don't really talk about these things.
Yeah. And so the only 2 examples in this book that I had heard about are kind of the 2 marquee examples that she touches on, which are the Tuskegee syphilis study and I forget the name of the prison, but it's the prison where the book Acres of Skin and the documentary Acres of Skin are based on.
Yeah, and so those 2 I've heard about as well.
Yeah, those are like the 2 marquee examples that I think if you've taken a medical ethics class, you've probably heard about. And also because they like drastically changed the way we or the way federal law like mandates how consent is obtained and if, you know, populations, specifically like prison populations, can give consent and things like that. So yeah, so it hit close to home. It's also, so I've donated leukocytes to a clinical study here on campus. And so that was like it's a non-therapeutic research-based procedure that I underwent, a non-surgical procedure. It's like donating platelets if you've ever donated platelets, but it takes a lot longer. And even for that, like the consent forms are pretty in depth, and like I have a science background, so I read it and like I understood what it was, but I don't see how someone who doesn't have that same background could read that and understand exactly what's going on. I mean, granted, it was a pretty non-invasive procedure, so it's like not a big deal, but like if you know, you're experiencing a more invasive procedure, like it's difficult to obtain consent, and I think often people who are in a position where they would benefit from an experimental therapy or are being asked to consent to non-therapeutic based procedures for research. You know, I think in a lot of instances, people probably don't totally understand the consent form, even though they are provided with consent forms. And also, like my mom went through a lot of medical stuff when I was a kid. And if you have like a serious medical condition, you sign a lot of forms. And sometimes people just might not be reading them anymore and like might not know what that is. So, I mean, this book talks a lot about the historical basis, but also I think it's useful in terms of looking at, what's going on now in the medical system and how we could probably stand to improve consent acquisition. But I don't really know how we do that. I think we probably need to improve that, even though like we're trying, but we're not really there yet in terms of
Yeah, and the notion of informed consent has been around for 60 years. The reason people don't do it is because doing it right is time consuming and pain in the ass. And that's not changed at all. People write down informed consent was obtained. It's just you shove a form at someone and say sign. There are people who do this, who do it better, and people who actually care about the ethical part of it and will sit down with their patients and explain what exactly is going on. But in my experience, a lot of the time that's kind of cut abruptly because you have this overworked resident who needs to see 40 patients in county in the next 4 hours, and they don't have time to sit down and explain everything. So this process gets kind of cut. And in the best case scenario, it's like no harm done because the patient actually needs the procedure and the consent's kind of a formality, but in certain cases, as we've seen, there could be a potential for great harm, and it is an issue. But I think like consent's just the tip of the iceberg. Like, yeah, we should get consent worked out, but that's not really the issue. The issue is that we experiment on our second-class citizens at home and abroad because it's easy. And because we use the carrot of free and accessible healthcare for people who don't really have it. And in some cases, it's borderline coercion because it's, you can't make an informed decision if participating in a study or having to deal with, like trainees or having to deal with students or any of this stuff is a prerequisite for you to getting care. Like the book, that for me is the more serious issue. Is the book mentions at many points in time that the reason that so many people are disproportionately enrolled in the study is because it's done pretty much exclusively in areas that cater to like the working poor, African Americans, minorities, people who have to go to that medical center, otherwise they can't really get access to care. And it's like very much the author mentioned something that was just like, yeah, no, that's completely right. Is that medical schools make a selling point of, here, come work with our underserved urban community, and that's sort of like double speak for, we got a bunch of people who the only way they're going to get access to care is to deal with your inexpert administrations and otherwise bullshit. So come get the experience and the training.
Yes. I mean, yeah. And obviously, one of the things the book also talks about is how that has like roots in historical problems. Like it's not like an isolated problem. It's like ongoing. That's basically been present in our medical system since the beginning.
I mean, for African Americans in particular, the root of slavery and, being treated as essentially expendable guinea pigs for whatever, like, the upper classes want to do to them, that's particular to American culture, but this isn't particular to American culture. This is worldwide. For colonial powers, for European powers, it's essentially it's a symptom of inequality in healthcare. If everybody has the same level of access to healthcare, or has even at least not the same, but a good level access to healthcare, I think a lot of these problems are going to start to disappear. But
But that's not going to happen anytime soon.
Yeah, our research and our training is born on the backs of people who don't really have much of a choice and have to suffer disproportionately to the amount of benefit that they receive from our work. Because even when we develop new drugs and therapies, let's face it, they're probably going to be the people that are least likely to benefit from them, because they're the people that are going to be least likely to afford them or to be able to go to medical centers that offer them.
Yes. And so I wanted to talk about one of the things that the author talks about a lot in this book, which ties into what you're just saying, is kind of like the fear of receiving treatment that's prevalent in certain African American communities, and it kind of ties into like some of the like crazy conspiracy theories that like AIDS was a bioterror agent to kill Africans and things like that.
I've run into that.
What?
I've run into that one.
Yeah. So have I, actually.
Kind of,
I had a coworker when I worked a shitty minimum wage job in college. I had a coworker who like legitimately believed that and refused to go to the doctor. And I was like I don't know what to say to you.
Or because I once sat on a plane on a flight to London with this like really like, you know, one of those people who sounds nice and cool and rational until like the crazy starts pouring forth. And his opinion was that Hitler invented AIDS. I mean, he was white, but his opinion was that Hitler invented AIDS to get rid of racial minorities. I'm like, you couldn't invent AIDS in the 1940s. You can do it now, but you can do it in the 1940s. I'm sorry.
Yes. So anyway, the book, I mean, so like the book touches on how like there, because of the historical precedence of having a lot of experimentation on Black people and other like poor and marginalized groups, that's led to like a fear of getting treatment, or a fear that like if you go to the hospital for treatment, you'll get enrolled in a research study against your will, or things of that nature, which is interesting and a real thing.
Which are valid and true, yep.
So yeah, I mean, I think the book is interesting from that standpoint, and I think the author does a really good job of developing and expanding that argument and trying to make it seem logical, I guess, make it understandable to a reader, to any reader, basically.
Yeah, I think the author pretty much succeeds in what she does. I like the book overall. It did drag a little bit, mostly because it's kind of samey the way she presents and discusses these things. So you know, she goes through, she proceeds by and large chronologically, and she goes through lots of different, basically lots of different
case studies,
like medically unethical case studies of what physicians have done to mostly African Americans, in some cases like the urban poor and other people. Most case studies, she demonstrates how African Americans were preferentially targeted for dangerous and risky studies, the fallout from them, and in certain cases, laws and other various legal action that has been taken later to rectify some of these things and introduce protections for patients within study populations.
Yes, I do think. So I think part of the reason why the chapters feel a little bit samey is, so my impression having read them is that the author has written them so that they could be taken individually, like reprinted individually and used in like a class setting or something like that.
Yeah.
Or just like published online individually. So like, or like in medical school, if you want to, you know, teach your students about some specific aspect that the author touches on, you could just use a chapter. Like the chapters are pretty self-contained, and that I'm pretty sure you could read them out of context and they would still make sense, like out of context of the rest of the book.
Yeah, it makes it drag a little bit. So near the end yesterday when I was finishing up, it was a bit of a tough sit, but I liked it overall. I think it's a strong parallel for another book that I like, which is Stephen Jay Gould's Mismeasure of Man, which I think she actually quotes or cites at some point in this work. the things are well researched, well explained. There are
Well
a couple times
documented
well
where possible.
documented.
Yeah,
There are
where
a couple,
possible.
yeah. She writes in a relatively interesting style that's engaging, despite the fact that it's quite repetitive by nature.
And also some of the things are really terrible.
Yeah, some of the things are pretty bad. You know, trigger warning, I guess, depending on how uncomfortable you are with certain
I don't know if
medical
that's
scenarios or
trigger
situations.
warning so much as like you're gonna read some gross stuff. Like you
Yeah,
will probably be grossed out at some point reading this book and like freaked out.
I think reading about vaginal operations on anesthetized women and genital mutilation may be a trigger warning for some people.
I think everybody? No?
No, I mean, I've done some of these surgeries.
Ugh.
Not
Yeah,
on
but they were
anesthetized women, yeah, but
anesthetized.
yes. But
And
yeah,
like you didn't like buy them and force them to live with you.
no, I didn't. That is true.
There are several layers of unethical going on in that particular example, and like it's bad all the way down. Like
Yeah, it gets pretty dark, depending on how squeamish you are regarding medical things and just like, you know, really, really bad things. You may kind of have to take a break at certain points in the book and look at the flowers and pet a puppy or something.
yes.
That's a thing. So there's that. But overall, I think it was well written, well presented, and a pretty good book. Apart from a couple of specific things where I think her interpretation of certain drugs or results was misleading, wrong, or has changed in the years since it was published, but those are very few and far between. I pretty
And
just generally agree with her point because this is something I've experienced and gone through, and I know that its dark specter has not gone. It's still here, and it will be ready to rear its ugly head, if not on the now much better protected African American prison populations than perhaps things in the third world or Africa, or if things go downhill, maybe once again on African American and other unprotected populations. So it's it was just sort of a reality of medical research and power, and we have to be vigilant and make sure that things are done on an ethical basis. Otherwise, this isn't the savageries of history. This is people being people to other people. That's not going to change.
yes. I also like this book overall, and I think it's worth a read. If you do find a particular chapter that's too gross for you, maybe just skip that one and move on to the next one. I do. So at the very end of the book, the author makes a point that I kind of wish she had brought up earlier in the book, where she's talking about, she's like, these are the medical abuses, and this is the reason why a lot of Black people are afraid of going to the doctor. But that doesn't mean that we as Black people should, like, just because these things happen, it doesn't mean that we should completely piece out of the medical system. Like, we still need to participate in the medical system, both in terms of getting care, but also in terms of being involved in research, since research does disproportionately affect Black people, that we should be like on the IRB committees and like get involved and be informed. And that, I mean, I think that's an important point, that it's important for lay people to be involved in medical research, and it's important for anyone in the United States to be informed about medical research and medical procedures, because like that's the way our healthcare system works, that like you are the person who's going to know the most about your medical procedure and your medical care. And I think that's an important point, like not for at risk communities in particular, but like really for everyone, that unfortunately that is the reality of our medical system, that you will need to manage your own care if you ever become sick. And a step of that is being informed when you're well, and it's important to learn about like things that you might be at risk for and things of that nature before you get sick. And I think that's a point that she brings up at the end of the book, but I kind of wish she had like mentioned it in the beginning of the book, because I think it's a really important point.
Yep. And if you find that your doctor isn't willing to take like the 5 minutes to discuss with you the medications, you have to, as a patient, talk to your doctor, because your doctor is a busy person who's got lots of notes and paperwork to do. Their life is mostly paperwork. So they're naturally going to be pushed by the system that we have now to spend as little time as possible or do things as quickly as possible. So you have to be proactive and talk to your doctor about, not just if you're African American, but any patient, any person, talk to your doctor about things, medications that they prescribe, ask questions about potential side effects. If you do experience potential side effects, you got to bring that up to your doctor. And if you find if your doctor brushes you off or is unwilling to talk to you about it, then you got to find a new doctor, because that person clearly is not right for you. So
yes, and it is really unfortunate that all of this burden goes onto the sick person, but that is just the way, like right now, that is the way our healthcare system works. So it sucks, but like,
yeah, I mean, there's a lot of burdens on physicians too, and the sort of overworked physician with not enough time to see you, and a patient who may not necessarily be like well versed in medical things and doesn't really know what to talk to or what to ask about. Like, that combination just is disastrous. So as a patient, be proactive about your health. If you're ever sick, keep your doctor there for an extra couple minutes, even if they seem like they want to rush off. Ask about things. Don't be afraid to ask questions. And if your doctor gives you up, find a new doctor. If your doctor is not willing to talk to you about it, or just doesn't seem to have the time, or is dismissive, then that person's not right for you. So yeah, find someone else.
Or do the best that you can to find someone else. Which it can be hard to find other doctors.
It can be, but things are improving, and there are a lot of doctors in the area that take, like basic levels of insurance, Medicare or Medi-Cal. So it can be hard if you're like, in the middle of nowhere and there's literally one doctor in like a 50-mile radius, and you kind of, then you have to kind of think about how you want to approach it and just try to keep that person there and talking to you for a little bit longer. Otherwise, if you're in a city next to like several large medical centers, then it's time to shop around, find someone else.
Anyway, okay, so back to the book, I guess. Is there anything else in particular you wanted to talk about? Any of the, so as we mentioned, we haven't heard a lot of the specific case studies that the author brings up, and I talked about the vaginal fistulas one, which like really was a icky one for me. Is there anything in particular that like really stands out in your mind?
All like the kid stuff really shocked me. Like that stuff, I was just like, whoa. Like that's like completely fucked up.
So you're talking about like so there's
like the foster care system that basically enrolled kids in dangerous studies without any level of consent. So coming back to it,
the foster care system is their guardian, but it's also,
yeah, it's their guardian, but it has a conflict of interest to basically donate these kids to studies without the consent of any guardian. And sure, they don't really have any guardians, but that doesn't mean they're free medical subjects. That means they cannot consent to medical care, or sorry, not medical care. They can't consent to medical experimentation. Like even like kids in normal studies having their parents consent for them, that's shady and probably should be very, very restricted on how and why that can be done. And is like an area where we can really hone in informed consent laws. But to take kids without any legal guardians and just, you're a medical experiment subject now. That's like go to prison for life shit, in my opinion. So yeah, that was probably the most shocking thing to me, apart from some of like the South African bioterrorist stuff.
Oh, actually, the South African thing was something that I'd heard about before, so that probably wasn't as shocking to me.
Yeah, no, I hadn't realized I hadn't heard about their like chemical and biological weapons stuff at all. So that was pretty, and to hear that that guy got off and is still basically a free person, that was pretty shocking.
Yeah, so we're talking about
the kid stuff was.
So the South African thing we're talking about is under apartheid, South Africa during apartheid. It's like the Surgeon General. It's like the top doctor in the country. I forget what exactly his position title was. Did experimentation on Black people that was like biowarfare experimentation.
He ran a program designed to genocide.
Yes.
Basically, Black people. He had 50 scientists working under him who have at least 200 victims behind their belt in various political assassinations. Essentially, they started they did what like James Bond era Soviet spies were portrayed as doing, which is like find covert hidden ways to poison or kill people with biological and chemical warfare, and ultimately started working on with their ideal end goal in mind is a pathogen, virus, or bacteria that targets exclusively Black Africans in their country so that they could keep power. With that's worse than like 99% of the stuff that Nazis did.
Yes, that one I'd heard of. I knew that doctor had gotten off. Like when she brought up South Africa, I was like, oh, we're going to be talking about this now. Fun. Because, yeah, yes, it's really bad. Like, there's no way around that. Like, it's just really bad.
Yep.
So going back from, like, actual autocracies, the stuff on birth control was interesting to me.
Some of birth control was interesting to me as well. I had no idea that Margaret Sanger, founder of Planned Parenthood,
was also involved in the eugenics movement.
Yeah, had an alternative sort of plan to like shrink the African American population via birth control.
I knew that
as a way to.
I knew that birth control was
weed out bad things.
Yeah, I knew that birth control was partially funded by the eugenics movement. I knew the development of birth control was partially funded by the eugenics movement. Like going into this, I knew that because like forced sterilization is a thing, and she talks about that. But like there were people in the eugenics movement who either didn't believe that was right or thought it was too damaging to their image, and so they started funding research into birth control, and that's kind of how like the birth control pill. That's kind of the reason why the birth control pill exists at all, or existed at the. I guess it's the reason why the birth control pill existed at the time that it did. Like if you've ever thought like the birth control pill was invented in like way earlier than it was socially acceptable to be on the birth control pill. Like why is that? It's mostly because of the eugenics movement, and they funded that research, or at least partially. So I kind of knew that, but yeah, I kind of knew that, and I knew that like some birth control was tested in Puerto Rico before it was like it was tested. Yeah, it was tested in Puerto Rico before it had like completed phase 1 clinical trials or something like that, where it's like that's not okay. So I kind of knew some of it, but like she goes into a lot of depth on the development of birth control and how it was targeted at like minority communities, both in the United States and abroad. And yeah, I guess I didn't know like the extra layers of it, and it also like raises some issues. Like birth control has a lot of side effects, and like different birth controls have different side effects, but we don't always like there's surprisingly poor numbers on like what percentage of women have side effects and like what type of side effects they experience, and like the book and its explanation of how birth control was originally tested kind of explains part of that, and that like they downplayed the side effects, they didn't tell people about the side effects, and things like that.
Yeah, that section also has the thing that I disagree with her the most, is that she like has a blanket statement that Depo-Provera is carcinogenic. It actually protects against multiple types of cancers, and is actually quite safe.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's kind of wrong information, or at least has been proven to be wrong since she published the book. What?
Okay. It was a carcinogen, like it was not offered at one point. Like I remember it being offered like when they started advertising for it again.
Yeah, I forget exactly. There was a study that was essentially interpreted incorrectly.
Okay. That's interesting. I mean, I don't. Now I'm kind of gonna look it up to see like when it was like re-approved, because it might have been after this book was published.
There's I think there's some evidence that it had breast cancer potentiating effects, but I think that was disproven.
Okay. Well, it's still not great because it increases your risk of osteoporosis more than most birth control. I mean, so I guess if you're at risk of osteoporosis, it's not good. I've never considered Depo-Provera because I'm at a higher risk of osteoporosis than most people, but like I know people who have done it and been fine with it. So anyway, we are going down a rabbit hole of looking at minutia, aren't we?
Okay. Yeah.
Anyway, is there anything else we want to talk about?
No, not really.
Okay. So I guess
this was a good choice.
Yeah, I think it's a good book. I don't know if saying I liked it is necessarily the correct description, because
I liked it.
Some key parts. Yes. Well, it was informative, and I'm glad we read it. Okay, so I guess we will have. We will have our next book club in 3 weeks on December 4th.
Yay!
Which is also a Sunday.
Yay!
And we'll be reading Ivan's book, which is a humor fantasy book, and which I already forgot the name of because it was kind of long. Yeah, going in a totally different direction. And I guess that's it. We'll talk to you guys then. Bye.
Bye.